Assalamu alaikum. Greetings of peace. We want to welcome our friends in South Africa, the United States, and around the world to this week's edition of A Conversation with El-Hajj, Mauri, Saalakhan. I'm pleased to be your host, coming to you once again through the Salam Media platform out of Johannesburg, South Africa. Salam Media is an online portal for humanitarian journalism. We don't just report the news, we advise you on what you can do about it. Today's hot topic is crime and punishment, American style. Now, for those of you who saw the promotional banner for today's broadcast, you would notice that we used 3 Ks in American as opposed to the customary C. And we did this for a reason. You know, whenever I refer to America with the 3 Ks, I'm referring to the other America. There have always been 2. There is the America that we promote to the world, you know, the America the beautiful, a land of liberty and justice for all. That land of opportunity that so many people around the world will literally risk their lives to come to. But then there's the other America. There is the America that we have seen more of over the course of this nation's history. And that other America, the one that we must challenge as a principle of conscience, is the America that we want to focus on in today's broadcast. To help set the tone and to further elaborate on the point I just made, I want to share with you a very thought-provoking quote from the late U.S. Senator J. William Fulbright. Now, many of us around the world are familiar with the Fulbright Scholarship. This scholarship was named after Senator Fulbright, and he chaired the powerful Senate Foreign Relations Committee longer than any other senator in U.S. history up to that point. I don't know if anyone has come along to eclipse him since his passing some years back, but up until the time that he retired from the U.S. Congress, he held the record. And no doubt from that very unique vantage point, he was able to assess America through its both domestic and foreign policy. And as is often the case as we get older, we tend to be more honest with ourselves and with those around us. So we are more honest in our assessments. And when he wrote the book, The Arrogance of Power, which was like a political memoir. It's a book that I have referenced over the years in speeches, and I've encouraged folk who have not read it to read it because it is a very thought-provoking piece, and it will help to, for those who read that book today, The Arrogance of Power, The Arrogance of Power. It will help them to understand better much of what we're seeing, especially emanating from the United States of America, again, both in terms of its domestic and foreign policy. With that said, I want to share this quote. Fulbright said, quote, "There are 2 Americas. One is the America of Lincoln and Adlai Stevenson. The other is the America of Teddy Roosevelt and the modern super patriots. One is generous and humane. The other narrowly egotistical. One is self-critical. the other is self-righteous. One is good-humored, the other solemn. One is inquiring, the other pontificating. One is moderate, the other filled with passionate intensity. One is judicious, and the other arrogant in the use of great power. Now, I would add to that final clause, arrogant and frequently unjust in its use of great power. Last weekend, the Coalition for Civil Freedoms had their, hosted their periodic family support conference for political prisoners, or the families of political prisoners here in the United States. It was as always, it was a very valuable conference. It was an opportunity for folk who hadn't seen each other in a while to be able to reconnect and be re-energized by the discussions that took place, by the interpersonal conversations over breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and the culmination of that weekend's conference, that weekend's assembly of these families, supported by the activists that are connected to CCF, and also connected and committed to the struggle on behalf of these families and their loved ones who are political prisoners in the United States. The creme de la creme of this weekend effort was the visit that was paid to Capitol Hill. There were a couple of visits with congressional offices, at least 2 or 3 visits with congressional offices to lobby on behalf of these loved ones. But there was also something else that took place. And the Afia Foundation was the spearhead for something that truly reinvigorated the brothers and sisters who participated. They walked away full of optimism, renewed optimism and energy for the struggle that needs to continue. We held a stand with our families of political prisoners rally, an assembly. It began in front of the U.S. Congress and went from there to the U.S. Supreme Court right across the street. And in fact, most of the speeches that were delivered in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. Inshallah ta'ala, we're going to share a couple of the clips from that assembly with you during the course of this broadcast. But before we do, let me also note for the record that we are once again in a very unique period of time for being able to exert pressure, positive pressure for much needed change. And we need for our brothers and sisters who have been sitting on the fence, and our friends, our potential allies out there that have been sitting on the fence, to come off the fence on the right side of it and help out in this campaign to free prisoners who have no business being behind bars. While the iron is hot, as we say in the vernacular, we're in a very unique position to be able to do this right now because of the attention that has been brought to bear on justice-related issues both here and abroad. Again, to help out with this, the growth in consciousness around the issue of political imprisonment in the United States. And America has many political prisoners, many. We want to share a bit of footage from the rally that took place, and we want to also share some other food for thought during the course of this broadcast that will hopefully help to move some of our brethren off of that fence. Now, I want to begin. Let us begin the video presentation today with the voice of a young Palestinian sister who was speaking on behalf of her family and the case that her family, her father, is part and parcel of. Unfortunately, it's the case that's known as the Holy Land 5. Let's see that video clip, Brother Sadiq.
So once upon a time, there was a charity called the Holy Land Foundation. The Holy Land Foundation was inspired by my sister Sanabel, who was born with 3 chronic illnesses, and my father was sitting down in the hospital room watching the news, watching a war happen, and he thought to himself, my daughter is having the best health care she can get, and I want to be able to give that to other children. That's how the HLF was born. Years went by, they became the largest Muslim-owned charity in the U.S., and because of that, because they happen to be all Palestinian men, giving money, sheltering orphans, building schools and hospitals, not only in Palestine, but here in the USA. When the Oklahoma City bombing happened, they were the first people to go out there and donate their own blood. These men are now in prison facing 65 years for donating their own blood to our own American people. Our own people. They helped our brothers and sisters here in America. And because they just so happen to help kids in Palestine, they're in jail.
Wrong.
No justice!
No peace!
No justice!
No peace! This November 24th, will mark 14 years of this ongoing injustice. The day of the verdict was the day before Thanksgiving. We all went back home and had the worst Thanksgiving ever. What was once a holiday for us to enjoy. The fact that we're living in America. We're supposed to be proud of it, but how am I proud if I'm betrayed by my own government? And these people in this building, they denied to hear our case again. So if anything happens to my dad, it's because of you.
Shame.
It's because of the people in this building.
Shame.
I'm in here, and I'm standing right in front of here, and I have a fire in my heart because 2 weeks ago, my dad almost died. My sister, who the HLF5 started because of, died in 2013, and my dad almost died because of something happened. A fight broke out at the prison, and he got caught up and inhaled the gases, and he almost died. If it wasn't for the other inmates, he would have been left there to die. He saw my sister come to him. He thought he died. My dad is in his 60s. And if this happens again, he probably will die. And it's because of you. Because you didn't want to hear my dad's case again. Why didn't they want to hear our case? Because they know we'd win. There was no evidence in the first case. That's why it was a mistrial. The second case, they fabricated more lies. They confused the jury. One of the jury came up to us the day of the sentencing and started crying. You know what she said? She said, I would have never guessed that they would have sentenced them to 65 years. I thought 5 years, 10 years. That's what they did. They brainwashed them. And it's because of you. If anything happens to my dad, you need to be held accountable.
No justice!
No peace! And I'm not gonna wait for something to happen to my dad for us to stand up. That's why we are here, because the time is now.
Yeah, right.
The time is now.
Right.
Now!
The time is now.
The time
It
is
is
now!
The time is now.
The time
Free
is
Shuki
now.
Abu Bakr!
Free the HL5!
Free the HL5.
Family members will continue to die while these men are in jail. And they're in jail for helping our brothers and sisters all over the world. And that's something we need to remember. Thanks.
No justice!
No peace. Beautiful. Thank you.
No peace!
And the Holy Land Five, those brothers who established that charity that was doing phenomenal work around the world, they are still where they are, and our hearts are with them and their families, and the struggle for their freedom will continue as long as it is necessary. What's also important to note here, brothers and sisters, is that what happened to these Palestinian men amounted to a favor that the United States did the apartheid Zionist state of Israel. It was Israel that instigated that investigation into the Holy Land Five, an investigation that had no basis at all. And if I remember correctly, it was either in that case or in the Dr. Samuel Arian case. I believe it was the Holy Land Five. There was at least one Israeli citizen that was given an opportunity to testify anonymously. That case, like so many others, was really off the chart in terms of any semblance of fairness and justice. And anyway, those men ended up being prosecuted for just doing good charitable work. And the longer they remain imprisoned, the longer the stain on what this country is theoretically supposed to be, vis-a-vis calling itself a land of liberty and justice for all. Now, the second clip we're going to show you from what took place this past Monday, is the clip of a lawyer who represented a Somali sister, all right, a Somali sister who ended up being prosecuted for doing charitable work from the United States to the her people who were in tremendous need back home. She just wanted to help families that needed help back home. And for that, our government manufactured a case against her. Let's see the clip of the lawyer.
They never claimed she sent anyone a bomb. They never claimed she sent anyone materials on how to make any of those things. They recognized and they admitted in their prosecution that all she was doing was sending clothes and humanitarian supplies to Somalia so that people who were going through the same experience that she went through when she lived in Somalia could be a little bit safer. They watched her commit these so-called acts of terrorism over the course of years, and they never intervened. They tell us constantly that this is necessary for our safety and our security. What part of somebody sending clothes and humanitarian supplies to Somalia in any way threatens my security or my safety or anyone's safety is still beyond me. But what's more important is they knew that. They sat there and watched as these supposed terrorist charity payments continued, just so that they could build a case against her, and so that they could throw her away, and so they could teach the Somali community a lesson, the lesson being, don't help the people who are in the situation that you are in. Turn away and view them as less than human, just like this court views Africans as less than human and has viewed them that way since the Dred Scott case. And as a result of that, she ended up in prison for 20 years. But because of groups like this and groups of citizens who decided not to take it, legislation was passed allowing judges to rethink those kinds of prosecutions. And we were able to put a motion in front of the judge who threw her in prison to get him to let her out. And we succeeded. And now she's safe at home. But that's not really a victory, because it's not a victory until all of us are out of prison, until not one more person is sent to a cage because this country decided to fail them. We have to fight for our rights like every group of people that has ever had any rights. Rights are not given. They're only taken away. They're only taken away. We have to fight for our rights. And with that, I'm going to hand the mic back. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yes, indeed. We have to fight for our rights. We have to fight for fairness. We have to fight for justice. We have to fight for equity in the courts of the land. Why? Because in the logic, the twisted logic of Niccolo Machiavelli, that 15th century philosopher, advisor to kings and princes, he advised that there were two ways of fighting. One was with arms and the other with laws. And what we have seen throughout history is the ability for oppressive governments to use laws as a weapon of war. And this is what the United States and its allies have been engaged in for many, many years, using law as a weapon of war. You know, one of the most glaring examples of the disparities of justice as it pertains to what has happened to Muslims in America and what is still happening to Muslims in America is, you know, what has been going on in the courts up to this date around the insurrection, quote unquote, that took place on January 6th. You know, there have been a number of cases that have been settled through plea agreements. There has been at least one case that has gone to court, and that person lost. He lost. And that person who went to court and lost, this past August, I think it was, he was sentenced. Just 2 or 3 months ago, he was sentenced. Do you know what sentence he received for an act of violence, conspiratorial violence? This was a conspiracy that involved many players. A conspiracy, a violent conspiracy that resulted in not just the, the violation of what is considered to be a sacred edifice politically in America, the U.S. Capitol. Not just, it wasn't just about the destruction of property. There were people who were seriously injured and died. There were people who were killed as a result of what happened on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. on January 6, 2021. People died. And the most severe punishment that has been meted out thus far for someone who went to trial and lost. It's about 7 years. 7 years for a violent conspiracy that resulted in serious injury and death. 7 years. Versus the hundreds. God only knows what the exact number is of men, women, predominantly young men, very young men, Muslim men who have received, decades of imprisonment, sometimes life sentences in a number of these cases, life sentences without the possibility of parole, as if they had murdered a number of people. And these were nothing more than aspirational offenses. If we give the U.S. government the benefit of the doubt and say, okay, we accept the charges that you have brought against all of these defendants that you have marshaled through your courts, we accept them as having been legit. 99% of these cases were nothing more than aspirational offenses, things that the government claimed these conspirators wanted to do, but didn't. And yet they get decades of imprisonment. It's insane. It turns the whole idea, the whole concept of justice on its head. What we're seeing is that, all conspiracies are not alike, and the difference in the nature of a conspiracy, it seems, depends upon, how you look, who you are, what your religion happens to be, who your fealty, happens to be to. And it's insane. It's really, really insane, brothers and sisters. Ladies and gentlemen, it is insane. I'm reminded of of that quote from subhanAllah, that French philosopher Voltaire. He said, those who can make us believe absurdities can also cause us to commit atrocities. And what has happened, what is happening, what has been happening in America in the name of national security and a so-called war on terrorism selectively is an atrocity of the highest order. And because they have been able to get a large swath of the American public to buy into it, to agree to it, to be silent in the face of these types of injustices, it has gone on. And subhanAllah, you can't continue committing injustices like this whether you be an individual or you be a nation state, without there being some moral, divinely given consequence. Why? Because what Dr. King said so many decades ago is true. He hit the nail on the head when he said, the arc of the moral universe is long. The arc is long, but it bends towards justice. What goes around comes around. One of the reasons why America is in such turmoil, one of the reasons why America is being punished in so many ways, is because of this legacy of injustice that seems to be baked into the culture of this country, this country that comprises two Americas. I want us now to revisit the case of our sister in Islam, Dr. Afia Siddiqui, a case that is, in the words of the late Ramsey Clark, former U.S. Attorney General of the United States, a man who, after he left government, became an icon around the world around issues of human rights. A man who had a big heart and a very keen mind that was molded along the lines of a desire for justice for the least of these. He described the case of Afia Siddiqui as the worst case of individual injustice he had ever witnessed. The injustice that has been done to Afia Siddiqui, and I agree with that. I agree with his description of this case. When I heard him say it, I was with him in Texas when he said these words in a speech. I was with him, and they immediately resonated with me because I had been feeling the same way. It was the worst of all the courthouses and trials I had witnessed. This was the worst of the worst of the worst. And this was being done to an outstanding Muslim woman who had distinguished herself at 3 universities in America, coming here from her native Pakistan. She distinguished herself at the University of Houston, where she spent her freshman year. She distinguished herself at MIT, where she graduated with honors. And then she distinguished herself at Brandeis University, where she again graduated with honors with a PhD in cognitive neuroscience. This sister of ours, who is a hafida of Quran, meaning she has memorized the Quran, and she lived it. She breathed the Quran. She exemplified the beauty and the power, the majesty, the service-oriented message of Quran at all 3 of these universities. She made a huge impact in Boston, where she spent most of her years. And yet, Uncle Sam, my government, targeted this Muslim woman on nothing more than suspicion. The suspicion that she was a ranking undercover female functionary for Al-Qaeda. A suspicion that was never proven. And this is the reason why, when she was prosecuted in that shameful courtroom in a federal courthouse in Lower Manhattan, just blocks away from Ground Zero, she was never charged with any form of of terrorism, not even a conspiracy to engage in terrorism. They didn't even charge her with a conspiracy to engage in terrorism because they had no evidence to support it. Yet she ended up being successfully prosecuted, shamefully prosecuted, and then given an 86-year sentence, a cover-up sentence. Tried to silence her, put her away, just bury her for the rest of her life. And this is the reason why her case for us has been the major case on our docket, because it symbolizes so much. And given the stellar person that Afia Siddiqui was, and I believe despite almost 20 years of brutal imprisonment still is, because of the type of person she is and the lack of evidence to support what she was charged with, as well as what she was suspected of. We feel deeply that if we cannot get justice for Afia Siddiqui, if we cannot win the release of Afia Siddiqui, most of our other brothers and sisters stand very little chance of getting relief. The majority of them don't stand a chance. I was reminded earlier this morning of how we appealed to the first African American president of the United States in a press conference that was held at the National Press Club in downtown Washington, D.C., three days before Obama left office. We appealed to him to include Afia Siddiqui in the prisoners list of folk that were being pardoned or granted clemency. Unfortunately, despite a very successful petition drive on the White House petition platform, over 100,000 people from all over the world didn't just sign the petition calling for Afia's release, but also went a step further and left notes explaining why they felt the way they did. And it wasn't just Muslims. People from, the vast majority in the United States, but people from all over the world. And yet, the first African-American president who also happened to have been a constitutional lawyer, a scholar, both he and his wife, scholars of the law, couldn't bring himself to do the right thing by Afia Siddiqui. Why? Because of politics. Maybe being, overly concerned about his legacy and what his legacy might be if he were to release an innocent woman who had all of this stuff attached to her. It's so sad. This final clip we're going to show is a clip that it speaks to how it is Afia Siddiqui has been able to be buried on a military base in Fort Worth, Texas, for as long as she has without, an uproar coming from the American public. This conspiracy of silence, this conspiracy this conspiratorial cover-up has involved more than government agents from the United States and Pakistan. It's involved much more. And let us not forget Israel and its Zionist functionaries in the United States who never miss out on an opportunity to vilify Afia Siddiqui. It also has involved mainstream media organizations on the left, on the right, in the so-called middle, who have gone along with the official narrative on Afia Siddiqui, despite the fact that over the years, there has been an abundance of evidence to disprove most of what was alleged against her during that kangaroo court trial in New York City. We have had these mainstream media organizations that have gone along with this deplorable narrative, just regurgitating it from time to time. We saw a lot of it take place in the wake of that unfortunate incident that took place at the synagogue almost a year ago in Texas. Anyway, this last clip is a clip of, if I remember correctly, this is NBC. This is an NBC clip of them sharing some news on the Afia Siddiqui, the woman, the prisoner who was at the center of that controversy that erupted at the synagogue in Texas almost a year ago. Let's see the clip, brother.
Now, as Sam mentioned, during this 11-hour standoff, the gunman repeatedly demanded the release of Afia Siddiqui, a Pakistani woman serving an 86-year prison sentence for attempting to kill American soldiers. Let's bring in NBC News national security correspondent Ken Delaney with more on this. Hey, Ken, good morning. So who is this woman, and tell us, what is she convicted of doing?
Good morning, Savannah. She is one of the most enigmatic and interesting figures in the war on terror. She's been variously known as Lady Al-Qaeda. She was once called the most wanted woman in the world. She's serving an 86-year prison sentence in that Fort Worth Medical Center near the site of this incident after being convicted on charges of trying to kill American soldiers when she was captured in Afghanistan in 2008. So let's backtrack. She came from a prominent Pakistani family. She was educated in the United States, degree in biology from MIT, PhD in neuroscience from Brandeis, and then, according to U.S. law enforcement officials, became radicalized after 9/11 and disappeared for a while and was named as a terrorist by U.S. and Afghani authorities. And when the Afghans captured her, they say she had plans for a mass casualty attack in New York City. And she was brought into a room, according to the court records, not handcuffed. U.S. law enforcement and military officers came in the room. Again, this is according to the trial and the court records. And they say she grabbed a gun, tried to fire at them, tried to kill them, and thus was convicted of attempted murder and is serving this 86-year sentence. But for whatever reason, she has been embraced by the terrorist movement, and on various occasions they have tried to leverage her release. In one case, when ISIS captured the journalist James Foley, they offered to release him in exchange for her. In another case, Bo Bergdahl. So she has been at the center of attempts to get her released for a very long time.
And Ken, I know there's some controversy surrounding this conviction from back in 2010, excuse me. So quickly tell us, what were these movements in Pakistan and elsewhere arguing? What were they saying had gone wrong here?
Yeah, and I should say, by the way, that her lawyer says that she had nothing to do with this incident and decries it. But yes, her conviction has long been protested in Pakistan, even by the Pakistani government. And there was a protest as recently as October in New York City in front of the Pakistani consulate. The argument is that her conviction was unjust, that she may have been the subject of torture, that somehow the Americans acted improperly. Again, this case went through the federal courts. Those allegations were not deemed founded at the time, but for whatever reason, she's been, the Pakistani government, the Pakistani people view her as a symbol of American overreach, Savannah.
All right, Ken Delanian, thank you so much.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top story.
So there you go. That is an example, and that's one of the, less toxic examples of the propaganda against Afia Siddiqui. I mean, clearly she had nothing to do with the unbalanced individual that was facilitated by forces unknown in coming from the UK, despite being reportedly on a list of persons who were persons of interest by the authorities there, was able to get a visa, travel to the United States, across the Atlantic, spent a couple of days reportedly in a homeless shelter in New York City, take a bus from New York, purchase a gun. I don't know if he purchased the gun in New York or he purchased the gun in Texas, but he was able to do all of this and then take people hostage in the name of wanting to free his sister, Afia Siddiqui. Now, clearly, this was a mentally and emotionally unbalanced individual. I mean, his heart was in the right place in terms of wanting to free this Muslim woman who he felt was unjustly imprisoned. But of course, because of his mental and emotional disturbance, he went about it the wrong way. He ended up losing his life. And the media nationwide, and courtesy of the Israeli government and its media apparatus internationally, I mean, they just had a field day with Afia Siddiqui for weeks and weeks and weeks, just attacking Afia Siddiqui for being the inspiration for this individual doing what he did. Attacking Afia Siddiqui and regurgitating some of the lies that have already been disproved. I mean, most of what continues to be said about Afia Siddiqui has already been factually disproved. Much of what you read in the Wikipedia of Afia Siddiqui has been factually disproved, and yet it's still there. And it is still influencing people who lack the capacity to engage in independent investigation for themselves. Seeking the truth, seeking the facts around controversial matters. And meanwhile, this woman, she continues to suffer. She is coming up on 20 years this coming March. It will be 20 years that Afia Siddiqui has been wrongfully imprisoned for an alleged attempt to shoot her way out of captivity. You know something, brothers and sisters? And when I say this, I don't say it rhetorically. I mean this in my heart. I mean this with all my heart. If I thought Afia Siddiqui had tried to grab a gun and use that gun to free herself after years of wrongful imprisonment and torture, I would be defending her on her right to have done so. fact, I would not only defend her, I would be celebrating her for having done that. But the fact of the matter is, that's not how it went down. It's not how it went down at all. Those Americans who were in that small room of that, Afghan police commander, arguing with the commander for custody of Afia Siddiqui. They wanted her turned over to them because what they had planned for Afia when they released her shortly before that whole incident went down, what they had planned for her didn't pan out. When they took Afia Siddiqui from that cell that she was in at Bagram in Afghanistan, when the Americans took her from that cell and reunited her with her son, who she hadn't seen in 5 years. Why? Because the U.S. government, when they kidnapped Afia and her children, they kept Afia's children. They didn't return her son and her daughter to their family home when they took Afia and placed her into one of God knows how many black sites. They held on to those two children. At the time of the kidnapping, Ahmed was only 6 years of age. Miriam was 4. And the baby, Suleiman, was just 6 months old. And we believe that Suleiman, he died in that kidnapping operation. They held the children away from their family home for years, along with their mother, all 3 of them in different locations. Miriam and Suleiman were not together. And of course, Afia was at Bagram. That was the last place she was. We don't know how many other black sites she may have been in before Bagram, but we know she was at Bagram. She was positively identified as being the only female prisoner known as prisoner 650 because of the number that she wore on her garb. And when they reunited Afia with her son and then made that call to the Afghan authorities about this suspicious looking non-Afghan woman with this young boy hanging around outside the governor's compound, we believe she may be a suicide bomber. We believe the intent was for Afia Siddiqui to be shot on sight by the Afghan police or soldiers. And if that had happened, case closed. But it didn't happen that way. Afia went into a mosque, surrounded by the men in the mosque. When the authorities came, they took her into custody because clearly she was not a threat. And there were many witnesses around. And so when they took her to that police commander's compound and put her and her son behind that curtain in this room, and subsequent to this, the Americans arrived. Military, FBI, CIA. And the argument ensued about custody. They demanded that Afia be turned over to them. It was then, I've told this story many times over the years, that Afia, hearing the arguments, the argumentation taking place, hearing the voices of the Americans, as she testified during her trial, she thought immediately about the secret prison and not wanting to go back. She got up, she looked through the curtain to see if there was an escape route near the curtain. And that's when one of the soldiers saw her, and given what he and others had been told about this dangerous Matahari. He panicked. He jumped up and he shouted, "The prisoner is free," and took out his sidearm and he fired. Shot Afia Siddiqui. So later, the story of Afia, of one of the soldiers, and in violation of military protocol, laying his M4 rifle on the floor out of respect. Yeah, right. And Afia coming through the curtain and picking the M4 rifle up off the floor and taking the safety off of it and trying to shoot her way out of captivity and being shot in return. Now, even subhanAllah, even the Afghan police commander couldn't go along with that. In an occupied land, occupied by the Americans, he couldn't go along with that. There was an affidavit, a sworn affidavit that was entered into the court record during the trial from the Afghan police commander that stipulated the prisoner never touched a weapon. And yet, for attempted murder, according to our government, for attempted murder, Afia Siddiqui ended up being charged with multiple offenses, found guilty despite the glaring inconsistencies in the areas of fact, despite the contradictions, the way that the star witnesses for the government contradicted themselves and each other. Despite all of this, the jury prone to find her guilty just blocks away from ground zero in a case that had been, in which she had been just consistently vilified throughout all of the mainstream media. Didn't stand a snowball's chance in hell of getting a fair trial, and they found her guilty. And as a result of attempted murder in which only she ended up being severely injured, she gets an 86-year sentence by a Zionist judge, Richard Berman, who didn't even attempt to disguise his contempt and, his lack of judicial fairness for this beleaguered woman who had to be wheeled into the courtroom in a wheelchair. And so it goes. So, brothers and sisters, we wanted to share this information today as a makeup for what we failed to do last week. Last week there was a mix-up with me and time, and there was just so much going on, and I just plumb forgot about the time change, and so we ended up missing our broadcast last week. And this was intended to be the broadcast for last week. In fact, what we wanted to do was to have live some of the speakers, and they, we had some brothers and sisters, family members, Muslim and non-Muslim, of Muslim political prisoners. We had them lined up and ready to go live last week, and but I blew it, forgetting about the time change. So with that, I do hope that you found benefit in today's broadcast. This struggle must continue. Like I said, this is a platform. The Salam Media platform is one that doesn't just report the news. We advise you on what you can do about it. And one of the things that you can do about this is to share, the information that you get through broadcasts like this. Make it subjects of conversation within your circles. Do whatever you can, wherever you are, to exert pressure on the U.S. government to live up to its claim as being a land of liberty and justice for all. It has never been this. It has never been this. And I don't say this out of animosity and hate. I love this country. I don't love the system of government that it has been running this country into the ground. I love the country. This is home for me. There's no place like home. I love the country. I don't love the system. The system needs reform. But the only way that's going to happen, and when I talk about reform, I'm talking about radical reform. And the only way that's going to happen is if pressure is exerted. Pressure is exerted on all levels. And those of you who are outside the United States of America, one of the things that you can do to help exert pressure is to discuss these issues as publicly as you possibly can. And those of you who have access to embassies abroad, the United States Embassy abroad, make these concerns a part of your periodic conversation with American diplomats. You're concerned about Afia Siddiqui. You're concerned about Imam Jamil Abdul Alamin. You're concerned about what has been happening to Muslims in the name of a so-called war on terrorism versus what is happening or not happening with other red-blooded Americans who are charged with terrorism conspiracies, but who don't get the book thrown at them when they're found guilty. We have to call this country up on its contradictions and hypocrisies. And for those of us here in the United States, I remind you that this is what true, healthy patriotism is all about. It's about helping your country to live up to the better part of itself. With that said, we want to end today's broadcast as we normally do. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Wal Asr. Innal insana lafi khusr. Illa alladhina amanu wa amalu salihati wa tawassaw bil haqq wa tawassaw bis sabr. Which means, in the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, by the token of time through the ages, surely humanity is in loss, except those who believe and do good, and exhort one another to truth, and exhort one another to patiently persevere. Peace be unto you. Assalamu alaikum.